Hey, welcome to the Push-Pull Sales and Marketing Podcast. I'm Marcello.
And I'm Sherry, and each episode will provide you with sales and marketing strategies that you can implement immediately into your own business.
All right, so very excited to have on the show. I have Marylou Tyler. She is the CEO of Strategic Pipeline. She currently works in her business works as a Fortune 1000 consulting firm. So she works with some of the largest companies within the United States, and she's also a well-accomplished author. Publishing, you have 2 books out there?
Correct, 2, yes.
2 books out there. Okay. So for our listeners, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, some of your interests?
Sure. Yeah. I've been working in this particular portion of the pipeline, what we call top of funnel, for about going on 30 years now. So I've been involved in lead generation before the internet. We used to do direct mail and direct response and telephone work. And so I've been really passionate about this particular portion of the pipeline for quite some time. I have my training, though, as a systems engineer. I'm actually a software developer, programmer, and
Really?
I came up through the ranks of engineering. Yes. And I was in a situation back then, where we were selling disruptive products. A lot of the new technologies were coming out. We were getting rid of analog, moving into digital. So the engineers got pulled into sales roles for support purposes. And then one day I came into work and my boss said to me, "You are now a salesperson. We just fired all the salespeople because they don't know how to sell these products." So That's how I got into sales. Yeah.
Okay. Now, was there any excuse me?
There was
moment?
a little bit of for me, it was fear. I mean, that's the best way to describe it, because I really was in the background and I'm not necessarily the most outgoing person on the planet. So to be able to sit there and have client facing anything was really scary for me. And we got no training. We were just put into those roles, and it's akin to being given a phone book and asked to cold call. It was like that.
I gotcha. So were there people in your organization were they given the 3-point motivational speech? So the first one is, here's your cards, here's the door. Second one, hang in there. Third one, if you don't sell something, we're going to fire you soon.
It's what have you done for me lately? So if I brought in a deal the day before, today was a new day, and what have you done for me? That was pretty much the mentality. Gotcha.
And I'm imagining, especially having that engineer's background, and also, as you said, where you felt like you were a little bit more behind the scenes. We talked about that when we had Tom Hopkins on.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get toward the middle because you have the interested introvert and you have the interesting extrovert, and everyone should be focusing toward the middle because you're probably thinking more along the client's process and what they're looking to do, and thinking of it in a more analytical way,
yes.
Which is definitely a different approach from your outside salespeople, or the salespeople that pretty much said hey, these people can't sell because maybe they're not the ones that are actually understanding the client needs, what outcome they want. And also, from your side too, being in engineering and operations, really seeing, hey, is this really even a good fit?
It was definitely coming from more of a consultative approach of, let's not waste our time on each other if it's not a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned to really my nature is to be very curious. So I really played up that strength. And that, coupled with very good listening skills, made me a natural, actually, to be in sales. And I was very humble and very truthful. So it all worked together to produce, every job I had in sales, I was in very good shape in terms of my quota.
Cool. And that's awesome too. Just, someone who kind of fell into it accidentally. So kind of fast forwarding to today, what are you doing right now, and how did you end up, having your own business at this point?
Well, I actually have been in business for myself since the early 90s. So
Okay.
I lasted a very short time in corporate America, which is kind of funny because that's where I spend most of my time consulting, is in the higher, the enterprise level type of company.
Mm-hmm.
But I just really enjoyed being on my own. And I was working for startups mostly when I started. And then a lot of them either got bought out, went under. So I, at one point, called my client base, told them I was going to go off and do my own thing. We were working on a contact center software application that needed a lot of tweaking and a lot of development work. So I started a firm that worked on that particular software offering. And that's how I started. So I've been in the lead generation space in some capacity, from either developing direct response information systems, actually coding them, to deploying them, to managing large contact centers, and now in my own space, helping people put these systems in.
Okay. So, and I'm sure you kind of have some things that you normally hear. So what are some common questions? So someone says, okay, so when you say top of funnel and you're talking lead generation and all that good stuff, so someone first hears that, what are questions that people normally ask you?
They normally ask if they're thinking about traversing down the funnel, like what's the natural point for a handoff if they do have sales reps with multiple roles. Mm-hmm. There's a definite, big question mark about how far do we take this thing in to the pipeline before we transition it, or should we even do that, or should we keep a team together from initial conversation all the way through close one and then servicing? So I get a lot of that. I get a lot of, how do we manage these teams, these pods? I also have people ask me about, which is good, the different types of leads and lead sources and which ones they should focus on. Which is a very good question, because not all leads are created equal. And we established that in predictable revenue, that there's still a big misunderstanding about the predictability of leads, and also this minnows versus whales concept of not all leads are worth your time either. So I get that question a lot. And then the separation of roles is always a big question.
Gotcha. So kind of diving into that. So, and you kind of said that a little bit before we hopped on this call. Mm-hmm. So how resistant do you feel businesses are today? And maybe it's less so in your space because you kind of have a proven model, especially in the enterprise, where maybe it's a little bit more complex cycle or maybe a little bit more complex product. How much resistance do you get, or how much feedback do you get in terms of, well, no, I've had one sales rep in one role and they're responsible for the whole thing. And why would I segment it at that point? Like, why wouldn't I just hire another company that would basically start the funnel? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, there's always valid points to every argument, if you will. But what I like to think about is the amount of time we're spending to prepare an outsourcer for doing the lead generation work. We might as well concentrate on doing that internally. I'm still a fan of starting the process internally. And once we have the process figured out, we know why people should change, why now, and why us. We understand the different buying scenarios of our product with the different personas that we're trying to sell to. And so once we have that sort of playbook done, then I'm okay with them shopping around an outsourcer to do that part of the funnel, primarily because they may not have the tools that allow them to do the number of dials and, the things that automation allows, but you have to have the telephony automation on-prem. They may not have it. So I do see some areas where once we get our story down and we really understand what we're doing, then outsourcing it looks like a viable option. I've seen outsources throughout the entire funnel. Some people outsource the lead gen, or the prospecting piece. Some people are actually outsourcing the account executive piece. So it really depends on your application, how it's sold, whether or not you really have that process down and figured out your not only your sales process, but your buyer's buying process. And then there's always this kind of give and take just to see what the resources are and what we can do. So I like to go in descriptively to understand where we are, State of the Union today. Then we do the predictive component, which says, here's where we'd like to get to. Here's how life we would like to be. And then we look at it prescriptively saying, well, here's the resources we have to actually do this thing. So where can we add? Where can we load? Or where can we cut back if we need to, the different types of paths that are coming in order for us to get these accounts to close.
Sure. And one thing in terms of thinking it from a larger perspective too, especially when you are changing how you actually divide up the labor there. I mean, what would you say are like if you do have a business that actually adopts it, like where maybe you have some inside salespeople that are doing some of the upfront work in terms of the lead gen and the top of the funnel? What can businesses do, and what information do you feel is the most important to kind of pass along and not kind of lose that along the way, especially when you hand off from one person to the next? I mean, the one thing that might be off-putting to a customer is that if the second person asks the exact same questions over again, it's like, well, what was the first person doing? So how do you manage that actual flow of information, or what pieces do you feel are the most important?
Well, we definitely map everything out. So if you think of an assembly line, that's the way the pipeline is in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And an assembly line has intelligence stations along the way so that you don't have anything fall apart as you're moving this thing down that assembly line. So we look at those intelligent stations to see what it is that we need to have really fine-tuned and spot on before it can pass go and go to the next station. And that's really how I look at it. So the handoff, if we do handoff between a prospector and an account executive, for example, is typically done after the band process is actually completed. But some companies don't even go that far. Some companies just try to get a fit call in, what we call an AWAF call. Are we a fit call?
Mm-hmm.
They try to get a 15-minute qualification call in. Once that happens and they get their top 3 qualifiers defined, the AE is brought in right then. Some of my clients actually start there because they're not comfortable with this whole handoff thing. So they actually bring the AE in earlier. But as they get more comfortable, as they start realizing that the AE resource is best utilized from opportunity to close, then we start shifting things down the pipeline. But we have metrics that measure all of these intelligent workstations so that we know exactly where the best place is to do that type of handoff.
Now, one thing from an HR standpoint, then, so again, you mentioned the actual like assembly line. Do you feel that both the account executive and the prospector are happier in their role, knowing that like, hey, this is what I'm doing, and they're becoming a master at that, and then like where they see a path where they can kind of move things up, or do you feel like sometimes there is some pushback in terms of, well, I was doing multiple roles before and I like the variety, and now you're kind of switching things up a little bit on the actual sales rep? So from an HR standpoint, do you feel like people are happier having like one specific role and people don't feel like as overwhelmed, so to speak?
It really depends on the culture. I'm working with a client now, and I'll just call them old school versus new school sales reps, just for lack of a better term.
Okay.
But the old school folks, we really would like to continue doing their book of business the way they do it now, which means they do all of the roles. So you have to kind of ebb and flow with that and say, okay, if that's going to be in the line in the sand, then let's bring these other folks, the new school people, and get them started to see if this separation of roles thing really will work in this corporate culture. So again, you pick your battles. So we really want to try to get a pod concept going, which is a prospector with some AEs and then a service person and maybe even a marketing account rep if you do have that many inbound leads to support one. And then we start this little skunk works over to the side and we measure the progress. And eventually I've seen a lot of the old timers want to pop on because they're realizing, wow, I can get someone to qualify my leads for me. I can direct them as to how I want these leads qualified, how far I want them to go in, and we work as a team. So eventually some of those guys will come over.
Gotcha. And
to the dark side.
Yeah. Now, do you think in those situations too, you also spend a decent amount of time in terms of figuring out compensation plans, or you don't get into that in terms of the actual division of labor? I mean, because you do talk about it like in your book too, because I mean, you have to incentivize the actual prospector for the quality of the leads too, because I mean, if he's just throwing stuff down the pipeline to throw stuff down the pipeline, I mean, some quantity isn't necessarily more important than quality, especially in a sales environment.
Right. And, up market, we have a lot of what's called MBOs, management by objectives. So we put those MBOs at the critical junction boxes, if you will, in the pipeline. So this sales qualified lead to sales accepted lead, that ratio, we have to have a certain percentage of quality that we look for, and we won't let it go through otherwise. So it's a pretty tight ship once we get those metrics in place, because we're putting metrics in that are meaningful in nature, that advance advance that record either positionally forward in the pipeline or out of the active pipeline. There's no stagnant water anywhere in the pipeline once we start doing this type of process that I work on.
That's good. I mean, I remember a prior organization I worked for. I'm not going to say the gentleman's name, but we had a gentleman who would do the prospecting, and sometimes when you were sent on a wild goose chase, you would say you got Z'd because his last name began with Z. So all the sales reps knew, like, all right, well, where did this lead come from? They're like, oh, it came from Z. Like, oh, okay, this is not going to be fun. And
Yes.
he would machine gun out, and the things he would say to kind of secure the appointment, or things like that would be listed. The quality of information greatly deteriorated from what he generated to what happened when the actual sales rep was actually in front of the prospect. Okay, so that's interesting. So how do you feel about then in terms of changing that model? A sales rep, can a sales rep then like move on up and kind of go through the ranks? Like, is that the ideal thing? Like, if you think of, for example, in your book, like if you work with the Salesforce.com, a lot of the people that are prospectors work their way up to small accounts, then work their way up to larger accounts, and they kind of see an actual progression. Or do you feel like people kind of stay in roles longer now? Like how do you keep that also balanced longer term too?
I really like the idea of if you want to move within the organization and try different roles. I mean, my daughter right now is going to be an English major. And as I think about that, it's like, wow, what do you do with that? Because when I was a computer science major, we went in school day one and they owned our lives for the last, for 4 years. And then there was only so many jobs that you can do as a programmer. So I like the idea of experimenting if you want, but I also have people, me included, who have been in lead gen and prospecting and love it and just love starting conversations with people we don't know. So I think if the comp's there and you're feeling that you're contributing to the corporation and that you have a good balance of work life, then some people stay. But I think, this particular type of organizational flow of the pipeline allows for a natural progression. I mean, since predictable revenue was written, we've seen the SDR role even splitting because of account-based selling.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, how about when you dive into a little bit again, and I would say it's kind of fairly clear, and we'll cover that in a little bit too, like what sets your process apart. How much time do you feel should be emphasized in terms of because a lot of what you say in terms of, when you have that specific prospecting role, a lot of that too is when you get the list and you have the actual emails and doing that versus, all right, well, if I sent out 70 emails today and I got 10 responses back, how much personalization do you feel like the sales reps should spend? Does that matter on the actual size of the deal? Or do you feel like, for the most part, if you have a good idea in terms of your ideal client, there doesn't need to be that much customization in terms of the email templates?
I think there's a combination of things here. There's the type of account, and I like to think of accounts as tiered, where you have your core accounts, the ones that you really want to have as clients in the middle of the bullseye. And then out from that is, the 20 to 40 accounts that would qualify as a core account, but you already have your core accounts. So they would ebb and flow between core and extended depending on what happened with the core. And then you have everybody else. You have that, and then you have also, where is this record positionally in the pipeline? Like I was telling my class yesterday, if you've got a lot of records in the cold status, meaning you haven't started a conversation, you're still not sure if you have the right guy, which does happen still because, especially in enterprise, there's multiple roles that can make decisions on your product and you have to find the right person. So if you're in cold status, I do like the idea of more of a leveraging technology to help you get that first conversation, meaning that our emails are still very value driven and they are written by persona role, but they're not saying, "Hey Kelly, I saw you wrote about your son's soccer game yesterday," and they're not that personalized, okay? But when they move into working status, which is you found the right person, you confirm this is the right guy, and now you're trying to really start building that rapport and trust, then I'm a fan of adding more personalization with a templated email. So your actual sales conversation and sales argument is predefined, but you're tweaking that email so that it's relevant for your prospect.
Mm-hmm. And then and one thing I really like about your books too, and I wish more people would embrace this, the and you went into so much detail in terms of the length of the subject line, the length of the actual email itself, and if it looks just like a normal like text email versus like with all the bells and whistles and what actually works. It would again, I would assume I would know the answer here, but you would probably agree that at this point it's better to have a shorter initial intro email than to have like and I love the examples too. We're like, oh, we're like a best in class and blah, blah, blah. And it kind of goes in A, B, C, and D. And I'm like, I'm not even going to read that thing.
Yeah. I think because of the one of the things that we forget sometimes, clients especially, is we're in the outreach business here. So we're actually picking those whales, those core accounts that we want to go after. Mm-hmm. We don't necessarily know what level of awareness these people are in. When they come inbound to us, they've done theoretically a search, an external search. Sure. So they know there's a solution out there because they've searched for it, and they may even know there's a vendor out there, meaning us. So those are 2 levels of the 5 levels of awareness. But when we're doing outreach, we have to also take into consideration the people who are unaware, the people who don't really know they have a problem and don't really think it involves them at all, and the people who don't know there's a solution to their problem. That still exists out there. So our emails have to be able to write to that person, which means, as you pointed out, their consumption of an email, if they're in an unaware state, is going to be very, very brief, very fast. It's not going to be reading a 5-page white paper when they're in that unaware state. So what we need to do is spoon feed them information that sort of wakes up the chill, gets them jolted, interrupts them. They look like, what? What was that? That kind of interruption and curiosity, and use all those triggers that Cialdini talks about in his book on influence. Really embed that into the email, but it's like billboard size. It's really tiny. And we're just trying to just get them enough of the carrot so we can pull them gently into the next conversation and then the next conversation. And we're always being helpful. We're always adding value. We're always suggesting a next step. And we're their guide, and they're our hero. And that's how we have to see them as we write our emails.
Sure. Now, in terms of when things are moving along the process here, and I think a lot of sales managers and organizations also kind of worry about that, especially when you change the model, when you do provide so much incremental value up front that you might have made somebody aware of a problem. How do I still leverage myself to the point where the client, especially when you have different segmentation, how do I leverage myself so that way the client doesn't just take all the information that I just made them aware of and then shop it around to a different vendor? Like how would I kind of ensure that, especially as I'm maybe providing all that value up front after I get that initial interest?
Well, you're really looking at sharing with them as the guide, others who have taken your hand and taken that first step with you and what their results were by taking that first step. Someone who's midway down the success path and how they're doing right now, and then someone who has reached the happily ever after state, all because they took your hand. So there's a big social proof aspect of this, that once you get them interested and awakened from their sleep, then you switch to a logical argument with specificity around it, giving them ideas of testimonials, endorsements, why other people have chosen you to take them through this journey. That is also embedded in the email. And in the predictable prospecting, we go through this construct called Compel with Content that actually walks you through how to create, whether it's 80 words or 480 words, an email so that it has all these components in it. It's like you're writing a little mini story in every email. And it's not hard to do because I have examples in the book showing you how it's done.
Oh, yeah. And going through, again, like how much detail you go into. And I love books that have a lot of like meat and content to them, because sometimes you'll read a book and you'll just see like you're just rinsing and repeating the same topic over again. So yours is very tactical. And I'm going to ask, were you an English like minor or anything like that? Because like also like your word choices and your verbiage, it doesn't sound like a computer science engineer. It's good. It's very, very well written. And again, when you talk about very vibrant language, waking them from their sleep and kind of giving them a jolt and stuff like that, like just like the way like you kind of balance to high level, because for some of our listeners too that might not be on the enterprise side, when you're saying like AE, BAND and all that stuff, some of those acronyms people might not understand, but in the same token, you also have a very vibrant language that kind of gets people's attention. I mean, did you have any sort of writing background prior?
Not prior, but as we talked about before, being thrown into a situation, I love learning.
Mm-hmm.
I studied and studied and studied copywriting and direct response and persuasive copywriting. I was just in a mastermind last year with Joanna Wiebe at Copy Hackers, for example, and just to learn as much as I could about how to write conversationally. And it just, because I do that so much now, and I do write as part of my block time,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I call time where we do a particular task in blocks as a business developer, prospector. I write every day, and I just get a journal out and write. I don't necessarily write anything of value, but because I write so much and I talk the way I write, and that's how I teach my students to do their emails, is have that sales conversation with your prospect as if they're sitting belly to belly right across from you, and then record that conversation into your phone, transcribe it, and guess what? You've probably got some really great content for your emails because you speak the sales conversation better than anyone else in your organization. So all you now need to do now is get that down on paper and get it into an email.
Absolutely. I like it. Now, one thing, and you do touch this in your book as well, especially when you talk about that band model. And the first B is obviously in that model is budget. And this is an area where there's definitely a lot of debate, especially, like, and you address, like, do you say at the beginning? Do you kind of say that at the end? Do you feel like, especially because solutions can be so customized, and like what I might be offering and what the outcome that the customer might actually want, where the budget would pretty much be irrelevant if I have a strong enough ROI? Do you feel like things have really shifted in terms of the need for customization in the product, where the budget almost does, where it doesn't really come into play, and unless obviously, I mean, it's fairly basic stuff where you're selling a $50,000 piece of equipment to a business that only has like a $5,000 budget, where you're kind of that far apart. I mean, how do you feel in terms of that actual change and how things are moving now, especially with, so much need for customization? I mean, you're just talking about your previous organization. It's one of the best things about Salesforce, and it's also one of the most difficult things about Salesforce.com, is you have so much customization, in terms of what you want and what kind of pieces you can put in.
Right. I think once again, since we're targeting these accounts, this is because my specialty is in outreach. So there is a little wiggle room when it comes to the budget question. And I think that it's really based on the product, what I call the buying scenario of how much you need to get your foot in the door kind of thing. So, I had a client, for example, has one product, but they sold it 3 different ways. So they had different requirements for qualification based on the way they were selling the same product. Some needed the budget, some didn't. So I think you have to look at how important is this client to us? Is it okay for us to get in the door on a project basis and get stuff done, and then, wow them with our over delivery and our over servicing, and then move into more strategic initiatives that they may have that are longer term? Or am I trying to go after the strategic initiative right away, which means there has to be some type of usual budget that they're planning for because it's a major forklift upgrade, for example.
Yeah.
And there's usually budget assigned to that. So that's really the call of the sales teams based on the products that they're positioning, the type of application they're trying to get the product in, whether they're trying to get it in the door, and whether this is a key account or a core account.
Okay. And especially for the role of the prospector, how do you think, or what kind of tools or what kind of suggestions would you have, especially now to navigate? Because in the ideal world we had, which is 20, 30 years ago, when I spoke with the president, I had one single decision maker, and now it's more of a community effort in terms of getting multiple people on board. So if I'm selling, software before, if I just talked to the software guy, I was good. Now I need to get the finance guy involved, and then you talk about the budget word, and then the end user is now more important. Whereas before they might not have actually taken in that actual feedback. And if you think about the, what I believe it's the challenger customer, now you're looking for like the 5.9 people. I forget the exact number, but it's like it's like 5 point something in terms of
5.3 or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. See, exactly.
Yeah. This is what I love about predictable revenue, because predictable revenue, if you look in the book, published in 2011, case study probably 2004 or 5, I think. There's a 315 process in that book. And what that is a 15-minute AWAF call, which is to get your top 3 qualifiers figured out. So is this a go, no go? It's a go, no-go decision right then.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to a 1-hour discovery call with usually one decision maker. And then you schedule a 2-hour qualification call with the team from the client, which means you're going to need to find them and get them in the same room and have a 2-hour call with them. That was the process that Predictable Revenue defined in this framework. So it was always thinking of more complex type sales. It can be used, and it's been successfully, you hand it over to the account executive to take it the rest of the way. So I think, that question about multiple people is really when you're doing your planning of the pipeline for the products that you're servicing, and also the personas that you're going to meet along the way in the pipeline. All of that should be figured out as from a planning perspective before you start any engine like this and turning the thing on, because you don't know until you really plan how long these conversations are going to take. And the predictable revenue formula, page 42 of the book, talks about lag as being one of the biggest elements of predictability. And lag is extended when you have more people that you need to sell your product or service to, or at least get them all on the same page so you can take that lead, pass that baton the rest of the way to the account executive.
Very good. Very good. So to kind of get into some stuff specifically to you. So, and again, if you haven't already picked up one of Marylou's book, I really recommend both of them too, because again, you kind of go through, and if you are that old school person, you probably would think like, oh, well, I don't like that model, or, well, it worked for this company because they had the brand recognition, or it worked in this case. And you do a good job in terms of making your case and having the numbers and saying, okay, this is why this model works, and this is something we experiment. And you talk about separating and kind of playing with, and it's nice that you kind of were fortunate enough to be in a position where you can kind of experiment a little bit. Whereas some companies, if you say like, I'm going to change how we do the model, it's not change is not the easiest thing for people. And anyone in sales knows that too, as they're trying to get a customer to move from one vendor to themselves, or to move from a smaller item to a larger item. But specifically, I did want to ask, what is an example of how your product or how your service helped the business, or maybe like what would you say you're the most proud of so far in your career in terms of maybe like your best success story?
Oh, I've had so many, but what's really interested me with the second book is that out of the woodwork, I've been getting a lot of inquiries from real estate people, and also from insurance and like FAs, financial advisors. These are people who sell direct to consumer usually, and the book says B2B right on the cover.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I've been working and dabbling in real estate lately to see how this thing can actually chunk away. And we've had so many successes that I've been very pleasantly surprised. Now, granted, we're doing all roles, but what we're doing is we're blocking out the time for prospecting a couple of blocks a week instead of a daily activity.
What's not really changed is the fact that we're still selling in some circumstances to multiple people. Where they come in relative to the position in the pipeline is where things vary. So a prospector may have to start a conversation with one persona, and then as it progresses on towards the opportunity, more people are brought in to either validate that this is a good initiative to spend time on, or they bring in people based on relative significance of what they're learning as they go. And what we need to worry about now is that not only are there more people, but we have to make sure that we are prepared with these sales conversations early on as a prospector to cover these people and have them all lined up. Some of them will be concerned about budget, some may not. So that's why I like to look at the planning for qualification based on the buying scenario, what product we're selling into that organization for what type of project, and also the persona that we're talking to. So if we work that up front, and I typically see a matrix that's based on the buying scenario of the product, and sometimes even by the persona, as to whether we just need, we need authority, we may need timing and fit, because timing is still a very important parameter for predictability in the framework. And predictable revenue rely on that in order to be able to give someone a pretty good idea of what you need to pour in at the top in order to generate the opportunities you're looking for that would eventually close.
Awesome. All right. So to kind of transition things, if you could give our listeners a recommendation or a resource, it could be a book, it could be an app, could be a course, obviously excluding your own material because we're already going to reference that, and I'll also give my own thoughts on the books as well. What would you recommend for our listeners?
Well, if they're focusing on sales process, the books like Predictable Revenue and Predictable Prospecting will give you a really good understanding of a process for sales for prospecting, top of funnel. But all these books are great, but if they also will accentuate any type of skills issues you have. So along with that, I would really focus on your questioning skills. So the old books like Neil Rackham's Spin Selling of how to ask questions that are designed to agitate our prospects or to think outside the box, those are the types of questions that we really want to focus on. And there are books that talk about how to do those types of skills that are independent of what I could teach you with process.
Awesome. And if our listeners, they've wanted to reach out to you, they wanted to shake up their organization and, someone is like, hey, I like this idea. I like to focus on the top of funnel. I like to focus on maybe segmenting some things because, when I did look at the data, and some people will find this, I looked at the data and, as you talk about in your book, like, all right, so you had this whole blitz day. When did you call that person again? It's like, oh no, I just called them that one day. That was it. So someone wants to reach out to you and they're looking for help. What would be the best way? How can our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way is if you're into LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. It's Marylou Tyler. So just do a search on me and you'll find me. I do a lot of blog posts, or I try to, on various topics that I find are important as we work through the process. The most recent one I did was on telephone skills. So it's called the 7 Healthy Habits to Book More First Meetings. And it goes through all the different phone issues that you come across. That's one place to get me. MarylouTyler.com is my website. And for readers of the book, I have a special page called Swag. So it's MarylouTyler.com/SWAG. And that page is loaded with teachings and webinars and trainings and worksheets and guides and everything I could think of is put in there that would help you do this thing yourself. If you took the book and you really wanted to work it yourself, I've given you all the worksheets that I use with clients in order to start planning your own process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And just one thing for our listeners too. And again, I read both books. I also, believe it or not, actually I had it on Audible as well. I do recommend actually picking up the actual physical copy because there's so much in it that's very specific in terms of, like the charts and the graphs and like you showing the numbers and talking about, the actual SWOT analysis in each organization and stuff like that. I think having the actual hard copy of the book is going to take you very, very far. Have notes and being able to highlight that. And likewise, Marylou, she's very upfront in giving you, that actual resource, so you can see the worksheets, so you can see exactly what you normally do, and in terms of if you want help aside from that, and you wanted to kind of ask for Marylou's advice, I would definitely reach out to her as well. And Marylou, any sort of final thoughts? Any other words of wisdom for our listeners?
No, I think the main thing is to, when you end this call, draw your framework, draw your sales process on the back of a napkin. Really it's that important to really draw your pipeline. Think about those intelligence stations that we were talking about and how you can create just a few little items in there, metrics that would be meaningful in nature, so you can start tracking where things are getting gunky and sluggish and having problems. And then fix one thing at a time, just one thing, but focus on doing one thing at a time to fix. And very soon you'll have a robust, high-velocity framework that will get you to the goal you want.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marylou. Really appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here.
I think that wraps things up for the week. Thank you to Ben Sound for our intro and outro music. Thanks to you guys for listening. Obviously, a big thank you to Marylou Tyler for hopping on the show. Tune in next time where we'll tackle another topic. You can view show notes and resources at pushpullsales.com. Follow us on Instagram at pushpullsales. Tweet us at pushpullsales, or shoot us an email over at pushpullsales@gmail.com. Thanks. See you guys.